Well, it's clear this vulnerability has exposed potentially thousands of organizations to cyber criminals and foreign adversaries, some of whom I think we've already seen been taking advantage of this, including reports that the Russian Federation has exploited Log4j to attack Ukrainian systems. The intelligence community has warned that the Russian government may perform similar attacks against the United States in response to our support for Ukraine. And certainly I'm concerned that there's no way to fully understand who has been victimized by Log4j because there's no comprehensive reporting in place, unfortunately. So Ms. Miller-Osborne, my question is for you. We moved legislation earlier this year out of committee and are now putting it forward to be considered by the full Senate that would require critical infrastructure to report substantial cyber incidents to CISA, who would be required to properly scrub and share such information back with the public. So my question is, how would this legislation, if enacted, help improve threat intelligence and help companies protect themselves?
So from a threat intelligence perspective, there is real policy benefit from sharing cyber incident information, especially if CISA is able to then provide bidirectional benefit. The legislation, of course, would need to be carefully crafted to avoid unintended consequences, but we appreciate the committee's bipartisan support and commitment to listening to that feedback and working to ensure that the legislation is as accurate and useful as it can be for everyone involved.
Thank you. Dr. Hare, from your perspective, could you discuss the benefits of incident reporting and the subsequent analysis and warning provided by CISA to other companies that would occur as a result of it?
Senator, I think the incident reporting requirements as have been discussed and proposed would add to CISA's ability to understand not just long-term trends in cybersecurity threats, but potentially threats across industry sectors where there might be silos in reporting at the moment. I think in addition to the incident reporting, though, there is opportunity for an entity to be created to really take the long-term analytic task of understanding what those incidents and trends in incidents tell us over time. I was encouraged by the amount of discussion and debate given in this body to the Bureau of Cyber Statistics last year, and hope to see that incident reporting is discussed in the framework of an additional analytic capacity in the future.
Ms. Miller-Osborne, recent reporting suggests Russia used the Log4j vulnerability against the Ukrainian government, where they saw over 70 government websites manipulated with threatening propaganda messaging. In your testimony, you mentioned that you've identified cyber criminals using this vulnerability to illegally assess victim computers for ransomware attacks. Who's exploiting this vulnerability and to what end? If you could tell the committee, please.
So from the visibility that I have, the primary exploitation that we've seen are coin mining, which is where someone installs a malicious piece of software on a system to mine cryptocurrency. That's typically flying under the radar because, you know, it doesn't really take over a system, it doesn't crash a system, so often it's something that people don't pay a lot of attention to, and we've also seen ransomware attacks using this. What I want to note is a lot of times people discount coin mining because it doesn't do anything big. It doesn't take a network down, it doesn't necessarily impact computing power, but it's a security problem in the sense that this is still malicious software that has now been installed on a system without your knowledge and without your approval. And that means that if it can be exploited for a coin miner, it can just as easily be exploited for other purposes. So it serves to highlight why it needs to be patched, even if, you know, we aren't necessarily, at least from our visibility currently, seeing a ton of nation-state attempted exploitation.
Well, would you follow up? Could you discuss why we haven't seen a major attack yet in your estimation, or is it simply we just don't know about it yet?
From my perspective, based on the visibility that I have, we were able to react and move very quickly to protect our customers when it came to this vulnerability. So the only real visibility my team has into this is the scanning that's taking place where entities of all sorts of motivations are trying to exploit this vulnerability. The difficulty becomes because got protections in place so quickly, we aren't seeing that follow-on exploitation where that's when you could figure out who's behind it. That's when either a ransomware payload would be dropped or some other sort of nation-state espionage-related malware, and that's where you could tease out that's who that was. Right now, from our visibility, all I'm seeing is mass scanning all over the internet for this, but that makes a lot of sense when you consider the number of people trying to exploit it and the fact that this has been incorporated into Internet of Thing botnets, which just randomly scan the internet for this constantly, so the volume is very high. But the fact that it's been adopted by botnets as well serves to highlight that this vulnerability is never going to die. It is going to be scanned for years on the internet with people attempting to exploit it if they can find vulnerable systems. So it really it points to why this is so critical to be taken care of.
Well, it's clear that in the immediate days and weeks after the disclosure of the Log4j shell, the cybersecurity ecosystem certainly went into high gear to identify the scope of this risk and to quickly remediate it. Part of this effort was extensive sharing of cyber threat intelligence, in part through CISA's Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. I know this question, a similar question was asked of Ms. Miller-Osborne, but I would like to ask this of you, Mr. Arkin. As a participant of JCDC trying to address this vulnerability for yourself and for your clients, how do you believe CISA did in this case? What was your assessment of their actions? And what more do you believe Congress needs to do to support these efforts?
Yeah, so the information sharing that happened through JCDC definitely added value to our efforts. The key thing for us, when there's an infinite number of things you could be working on, how do you prioritize your efforts to where the bad guys are actually exercising and preparing to do bad things to your environment? And so the information that we got through JCDC helped us to understand the techniques and attacks that were being observed in the real world so that we could then marshal our resources in defense of that. The thing I think that is most important when I think about threat information sharing in partnership with government is keeping the classification level as low as possible. And so if I go into a briefing that's at a very high classification level, if I can't share that information out to the rest of my company, I'm not going to be able to put it to its full effect. And so keeping things at the unclassified or for official use only level is going to allow us to most rapidly push the information out to the people who can put it to work in a defensive manner in our environment.
Dr. Hare, as you're well aware, open source code is developed internationally and used internationally, and this vulnerability not only impacts American companies, but it impacts critical infrastructure for our allies and partners all around the world. So my question for you, sir, is do you have any recommendations for how the government and DHS or CISA specifically should be working with foreign partners when widespread vulnerabilities such as the one we're discussing here today are discovered?
Senator, thank you for the question. I couldn't underline more the importance that the United States relationship with its partners and allies have to this issue. So 2 suggestions to you and to this committee. The first is to empower CISA with a purpose-built open source security organization. This is something that we've advocated for as a point of contact with the open source community, which, as Mr. Nally and others have pointed out, is globally distributed. So I think it's something that would provide benefit both directly to the United States government, but also to communities abroad. The second is to encourage that efforts to fund open source, these infrastructure investments we talk about, be driven forward in partnership with key U.S. allies in the European Union and in the Indo-Pacific. I think the underlying point for this discussion is that the consumption of open source, not only an issue for the United States, not only an issue for its close allies, but for the security relationships that we maintain abroad, the cyber attack surface that we are going to be forced to defend against adversaries is being shaped as we speak by these sorts of vulnerabilities. And so these kinds of long-term investments are not simply a protection for ourselves at home, but actually an attempt to make the management problem, the security challenge that we face abroad, significantly easier as well.
Well, thank you, and I certainly would like to thank each of our witnesses here today for joining us to discuss what is an incredibly important matter, and we look forward to continuing this discussion with you in perhaps other forums or in other ways as we work to address these vulnerabilities. Over the past year, we've experienced cybersecurity attacks that pose a a direct threat to our nation's critical infrastructure and the American way of life. And I believe that all of my colleagues on this committee can agree that we must continue to be diligent and proactive to improve cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure, the government, and other private sector entities as well. Incidents like SolarWinds and the Colonial Pipeline attack continue to illustrate the need for us to secure our supply chains and improve software security. The impacts of widespread vulnerabilities need to be better understood, and we need to pass incident reporting legislation to ensure that we actually have a full picture of the threat that we are facing in this country. And while I applaud the work of the administration and the private sector companies working to address the vulnerability in Log4j, it's going to continue, it will require our continued diligence, and we will need to be aware that it could be exploited in the future. Our adversaries continue to look for cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and we must be diligent in our defense. Open source software has led to significant advances in modern software and technology development, but we need to continue to improve the security of this and all other software. I appreciate the panel's discussion today on this topic and look forward to continuing this discussion in the future. The record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until February 23rd at 5 p.m. for submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.